Hello and welcome to another edition of Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. I'm Michael O'Toole and I'm joined by Paul Healy. Paul usually does it from his home office, but he's currently up in Donabate in North County Dublin, and I think everybody knows why. Hello, Paul.
Just opposite the scene here, where unfortunately, well, I suppose it is a welcome development for the Gardai investigating it, but it is a very sad development that skeletal remains have been found in the search for this young 2-year-old boy who's believed to have gone missing some time ago.
Yes, and the reason that we haven't had a pod in a few weeks is that Paul was off and I was very busy with lots of stories, including this really depressing story about this missing young boy. Now, one of the aspects was that the boy was not named. We'll talk about this, but we broke the story on the Monday, the 1st of September, and there was a clamour for the boy to be named. Gardai took an operational decision not to name that boy. There was a clamour internally within the force, and we reported on this, that senior Gardai had decided, look, this boy needs a name. This boy needs to be remembered. I thought that was a very striking quote from a source that I was speaking to. Now that skeletal remains have been found, they do believe it is the boy who is missing, and they have named him.
Yeah, they've named him as Daniel Aruebose, and he's, they believe, vanished at the age of 2.5, in and around that age. And Gardai have issued a photograph of Daniel. It's a lovely photograph of him, and I believe there were very few photographs of this child. May only have been one photograph of this child before he sadly went missing. And I'm sitting here, I'm just a few metres down from where the search is, where the search had been ongoing. So there's 2 diggers there, and you can still see members of An Garda Síochána, the technical bureau, there at the minute, Mick. And basically at some point this morning, Gardai uncovered these skeletal remains in and around the search site where they had been looking, an area of the site up here in Donabate that was identified by the mother of the child. So we'll go through the timeline of this, but the mother of this child has been in some ways cooperating with Gardai and has spoken to them at length, and she identified a part of land here where she said the boy's remains would be found, and it's taken a number of weeks. We're over nearly 3 weeks into the investigation, but Gardai have finally found those remains, which, although they've not been formally identified, they do believe they are those of Daniel.
Yes, they were indicated. Look, we'll go backwards, but just for today, they were indicated a second spot within the search area where you are, and obviously the human remains, the skeletal remains of a child were found today, and Gardai have said they believe it is young Daniel. Now, it will take a DNA test, and that can be done. That can be rushed within 24 hours, may even be sooner because technology has moved on somewhat. So, look, I would not be surprised. So today is Wednesday. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. I would not be surprised if the guards announced on Wednesday evening or Thursday morning that tests had established that the remains found at the site are those of young Daniel. So it is a very fast moving investigation, and I think there will be other developments as we move on.
Yeah, well, having said that, I'm also being told that, and you can understand that Gardai are obviously being very cautious with this investigation, and on certain aspects, I suppose, are taking their time. I mean, they have the mother of this child who is cooperating, and we're told has been speaking to them throughout and is still speaking to them. And, you know, Gardai are happy to have somebody cooperating. So this woman and nobody else is under any form of arrest at the moment. And we're told that Gardai are not eager to make any arrests because obviously at the moment they don't really have the power to arrest anybody on suspicion of any offence. Now, I'm told, and you've probably heard the same, Mick, that perhaps Gardai have the power to arrest people on summary offences on suspicion of concealing a body or something of that nature. But Gardai don't have any reason to arrest anybody on suspicion of, say, suspected murder at this point. So the state pathologist is due at the scene, and the remains are due to be looked at, and obviously a post-mortem examination will happen, and then they're hoping off the foot of that they'll be able to make a determination about any possible arrests.
The word that jumped out at me, and look, this is, I have to say, Paul, this is a very distressing case. There are a lot of elements of this case that are, I find, as a human, as a father, as a journalist, even really, really troubling and really, really depressing. And even the fact that they have found skeletal remains. I find that quite upsetting. I have to say, it's a little boy and it's just a skeleton. But that word jumped out at me. Well, we were continuously told, look, Gardai are searching for the truth. The first thing they have to do is find the remains. They believe they have found the remains of Daniel now. The next thing that happened is they have to confirm his identity. As I said, I think that will happen quite quickly thanks to DNA. After that, there's going to have to be a post-mortem. Now, we were talking off air about how difficult will it be, and I'm sorry that this may be upsetting to some people, but this is the reality of this investigation. That's why I said the word skeletal jumped out at me. It's a skeleton.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you would have some views because you covered another case when we could talk about this. Is it possible that a skeleton does not yield up any truth about what happened?
Yeah, sadly, I mean, look, hopefully that's not the case here, but it may well be the case that too much time has passed, and without getting too... I mean, it's a very grim subject to talk about, but obviously it's just, forensically true that if a body is left in a place for a period of time, decomposition process happens and, organs are no longer there, and that makes it more and more difficult to determine a cause of death. And that may well be the case here. It may not be the case depending on the condition of the body. And then bones can be examined, but I'm thinking of the recent case of Tina Satchwell. Now, Tina's remains were, they were buried for 6.5 years. Mm-hmm. So there was very little left there for the state pathologist, Margot Bolser, at the time to examine, and she was unable to determine a cause of death in that case. But look, there could be fractures, there could be signs of some sort of blunt force trauma, there could be absolutely nothing. And we'll go through the timeline of this, but we certainly know that the version of events that Gardai, the only version of events that they have been told to date, is that this child allegedly died seemingly of natural causes. And we don't know yet whether that's going to stand the test of time in terms of their investigation.
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think we're limited what we can say, but I'd be pretty satisfied that initially there were conflicting reports of how that child died. Now, I think both parents have now settled and are insisting that the child died of natural causes and that they panicked essentially, and the decision was made to keep the child's body rather than contacting the emergency services. That once they realised the child was dead, I think there is some word that they tried to bring the child into the bath to revive him when they realised he was dead. So yes. I think both parents now, I want to say now because I do think that there were conflicting stories at the start. Both parents now would say that the child died of natural causes, and that's really all the guards have to go on because it's the word of the parents. But as you say, there's scientific tests, there's postmortems, all that sort of stuff. So really, they're now bringing this investigation into another phase. But, you did mention Tina Satchwell. And if you also remember, I'm not equating this, I'm just saying about the difficulty with the Elaine O'Hara case. Gardai could not establish a cause of death with that case either. And in that case as well, the remains of Miss O'Hara, now, they weren't buried. They were just left in an open area. This child appears to have been buried. We were initially told that it wasn't that deep. It could be that the remains I think were in a bag subsided a bit because we know that there were diggers there. So look, really, it's all up in the air until the post-mortem is carried out. And even then, I mean, to be the bearer of honest bad tidings, there may not be any. You said, Paul, there may not be any cause of death. It's really in the lap of the gods at the minute as to what Gardai will discover.
And then if this is suspicious and they believe that a murder occurred here, they're going to have to look at other circumstantial evidence, And I note that in the press release today, Gardai are appealing for witnesses, any residents in the Gallery Apartments complex between July of 2019 to present date to speak to them. So, that is the area in which this family raised this child, and they're now looking for witnesses, anyone who may be able to either corroborate or cast doubt on the story that they've been told to date, basically. But that's why I think this could take time, unless the forensic tests determine, something that casts doubt on the story that they've been told to date. Remember, the father of this child's in another country and has another partner now, and I think they have spoken to him, but they haven't spoken to him face to face, so I'm sure that'll be the next step. So that's a process that's going to take time. But obviously this reminds us obviously of the case of Kyron Dernan, but in the case of Kyron, we the Gardaí don't have anybody cooperating, so it's very different in this case where the mother of the child anyway, and the father of the child to an extent, has been speaking to Gardaí and has given them a version of events, whereas they were able to upgrade the investigation in Kyron's case to murder because nobody was playing ball and the facts weren't adding up. So this is a bit more complex than that, it's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, and also in the Karen Dernan case, we do know that there was an attempt, or there was a decoy child used to hide the death of the boy. So that is another factor that I think elevated that case to murder. So look, it's this investigation. I was just saying to you, it's just nearly 3 weeks since we broke this story. It was the Monday, the 1st of September that we broke this, and it's now the 17th. So just over 3 weeks, actually, just over 2 weeks, nearly 3. The dig started on the Monday evening, Tuesday morning on the 2nd. So I was sort of, it's really mad. About 5 minutes before the press release came in about the discovery of this child's body, I was talking to a contact and I was going, Jesus Christ, what's going on? This case is going absolutely nowhere. Will they ever find that child? Find that child? And that person replied back to me, I don't think so. And then literally 3 or 4 minutes later, the press release comes in. So it shows you we sometimes work in the dark as well. But this case, I know you were on holiday, Paul, but this case really, I'm going to use this word, not going to use this word lightly. I think it horrified the whole country. As I said earlier, there are a lot of really difficult aspects of this. Will we go through the timeline that we have anyway?
I was just going to say to you, let's work backwards to go forwards. Like this all began on the 29th of August, didn't it? And just tell, because obviously you were across this story from the start. So the alarm was raised by Tusla, it's fair to say.
Yeah. So essentially what happened was there was an attempt. There's the Department of Social Protection look after all state payments, including child benefit. And we know in this case that there was an attempt to claim benefit for this child. Now, essentially what happened was we believed that I don't think it was really suspicions. There were spot checks carried out. I've got 3 kids myself. I've never had spot checks, but I think there is a mechanism in the Department of Social Protection that you can do spot checks. And essentially the Department of Social Protection asked for proof of the existence of this child. Where is he? What school is he at? And they were given a story that he was at a school in Balbriggan. And then when they queried that, I think they checked with the school and there was no record of the child being in that school. Then when they queried that, they were told that the child was with relatives down in the south of the country. They queried that and they quickly realised that the child wasn't there. So they went and spoke to a woman, shall we say, and that was on the, as you say, August the 29th. Gardai from Swords, Garda Station, which covers Donabate, where you are, spoke to this lady and she gave a version of events essentially saying that the child had died several years ago, and she indicated that to Gardai that the child had been buried in another area of Donabate. We know that the child lived in the gallery, as you said, in Donabate. This woman said that the child was buried in Donabate. Now, as ever, things begin to emerge slowly. We got wind of it on the Monday, the 1st of September. Paul, you hear things. You just hear things. And it's one of those, somebody said to me, listen, you should really start making inquiries about an incident in Swords. And that's all we had. We didn't even know. The story I was told, look, woman said, child is dead and is secretly buried, and I didn't even know whereabouts it was, and I had to do an awful lot of digging until we eventually found Donabate. So we broke the story and it really exploded, but things really developed very, very quickly from them. On the Monday evening, Gardai had been told by the woman, as I said, that the body of the child was allegedly in a certain point in Donabate on the Portrane Road. They sealed that place off on Monday night. On Tuesday morning, they started the dig. So that was the 2nd of September. And the dig has been ongoing since then. I was quite surprised. We thought it would have been over in a couple of days. But look, it's the 17th now, and it's really only lasted this length of time. But there have been quite a few twists and turns in that time, sort of parallel to the Gardai investigation.
And that's because the mother was playing ball and was telling the Gardai, identifying a very specific part of land, wasn't she, where she told them that the remains were found. And that's why it's surprising that it's taken this long. Well, but I suppose maybe people's memories differ over time, or things move, things also, in reality, things can be moved. You know, there's animals in the area, that kind of thing.
Yes, and I think, to be fair, that's a very valid point, because I know that I think a road had been built in that general area. There had been works in that area since 2021. The child probably died maybe 2021. I think that's the story that Gardai have now. There had been works there. I think there'd been other sites in the area. And, okay, people could remember the child being buried in one area, and they have another memory. So we know that, for example, the area was sealed off on the Monday night. The following Saturday, after, we know the cadaver dog was brought in the Tuesday, and there wasn't any sign. It didn't give any indication, which was a pretty big setback, I have to say. So the guards did a big fingertip search of that area, really for the whole week. Saturday, almost a week later, the mother went back to the scene with Gardai, and I think her solicitor was there. She was a witness, and she pointed out another area where she said, no, look, I think the boy is definitely buried here. It was in the same general area, but in another quadrant of the search site, shall we say. So the guards have been looking at spot A. She basically said it was spot B or C, quite close, not really far away, but within the same area. And that was the focus, and that's where the child's remains were found today. So she was right. The second time around, she was right. So look, people can get confused. It's a long time. And we also know that she and the father had visited this site at least once since the child was buried. I think she told Gardai that, but it's a 4-year time frame. People can get confused, I suppose.
It's just from a human perspective, it's very hard to understand the mindset. I mean, even if this story is true, and let's say that it is, that this child died of natural causes, the parents found the child in that circumstance, and their reaction was to go and, I mean, I think this apartment complex that's being looked at is at least 3 kilometers from here where this site is. So they brought the body to this piece of land, buried him, and covered it up and kept it as a secret for all these years. It's very, very hard to understand that mindset. Now, I know, and you've probably been told as well, that there are vulnerabilities here, but it's still very, very hard to understand, you know, even if there is no murder here as such, how any parent or any person could do that to a child's remains. It's just very hard to get the head around. Yes,
and of course there may be vulnerabilities, but they were both functioning adults. Mm-hmm. You know what you know what I mean by that? That they can function in life. So look, Paul, you know that I don't do opinions, and neither do you really. So I'm not going to give my opinion, but I will say, well, okay. Well, look, I will say, I think there are legitimate questions here.
Yep.
Would any parent who suddenly finds their child dead or perhaps close to death, what would you do? I don't know any human being who wouldn't try to raise the alarm, even if the child was dead, because do you know what? I don't think either of these people are doctors. I don't think either of these people are medical professionals. Doctors, certify death. So how would these people have even known the child was dead? Do you know what I'm saying? They can't say that my boy is dead. How can they? They're not medical experts. So that is there's a couple of series of serious hurdles for me in my mind. Yeah. And that is one of them. Why did they not call the Gardai? Why did they not call the emergency services?
No, I think that's totally fair. I think that's nothing got to do with opinion. That's just, I mean, it makes logical sense, doesn't it? You just think most rational people would, well, forget about rational for a minute, just anyone with a heart and a conscience would call the Gardaí, call an ambulance, but it's just very hard to get the head around this story and it may well be the truth, but it's still very hard to understand that they found this child dead, their own child, and that they moved on in life and left the remains there, buried out in this piece of land next to a main road. It's weird.
I mentioned hurdles. The first one is not raising the alarm, not trying to get medical help for your child. The second hurdle is, if the story is true that has been put out there, that they kept the child in the house for 24 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another hurdle. Why would anybody do that? Then thirdly, why would you bury your child secretly? There are three big things for me. On a human level, how could you do any of those three things? I just don't get it. I really don't. And I'm struggling. I've done this for 33 years nearly. I am struggling. Karen Dernan, but the Karen's remains haven't been found. We don't know what happened. The boy, it's a murder case, but we don't know. But we know in this case now that the child was buried and the parents buried the child. I cannot get my head around that. Secretly burying your child in a lump of wasteland somewhere. How is that possible?
It's a level of callousness that's hard to understand. But this also raises another question. The Kyron Dernan case we thought was an outlier, and now there's this. And obviously, I'm sure, and in fact, I think it has been reported that Tussla are going back and looking at many other cases now. How many other cases of this nature have there been that have slipped through the net? How common is this? The parents are covering up the death of their child.
This only came about because of a spot check by the Department of Social Protection. Look, it is very serious, and as I said, there'd been a lot of twists and turns in this case. Obviously, we reported the story on the Monday. We broke it on the Monday. On the Tuesday, there was another serious twist when it emerged. We learned that the little boy, really, I think since shortly after birth, had been in Tussla care. The child was given up for adoption. The parents decided that the child was going to be adopted. So it was put into state care and Tussla care, and there were foster parents involved, but it was in the care of the state. And that was a big thing. That really, you were probably away, Paul, but when that came out, that brought this whole story, a whole horrible story, to another level, because Tussla have been in the eye of the storm, of several storms, and they're very much in the eye of this storm. Now, they did say in their statement, the various things they didn't say, we found out from our own sources about the child being put up for adoption, but they did say that the child was returned to the family in 2020 and that there was no referrals or causes of concern about that boy afterwards. So from 2020 until 2025, when the news came in of the story about the child died, Tussla had no cause to be in contact with that family. So you're right, Paul. How many other cases are there like this?
Despite them having been involved previously, that's it. Their involvement stopped in 2020. God. Yeah, and that raises a lot of questions, and I think there's a lot of concerns now. I mean, members of government have spoken out about this, about how the system works, but also just in terms of the law. Does the law need to catch up as well? Because I was surprised to learn when I just made the phone call today about arrests that there's no appetite to arrest anybody here, because at the moment they've no evidence of any crime other than a body was concealed, and supposedly we're only talking about summary offences here, basically Mickey Mouse offences that there's no appetite to arrest anybody over. So they have evidence that a child was secretly buried, and technically speaking, there's no real criminal threshold for that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
We'll explain what summary means. So there's summary offences and indictable offences. Indictable offences are more serious. They go to the circuit court, or in higher cases like murder and rape, the Central Criminal Court. But a summary offence is a maximum of 12 months in prison.
Yeah, it's nothing.
So that's nothing. And significantly, I don't think he can be extradited for a summary offence. We know the father's abroad. So, and I don't think he's living in a country where there's an extradition treaty, but they can get him back. But it would have to be for an indictable offence, something like 5 years and more. So it's a shit show. And I will say one thing. I know Tussla are getting it in the neck. right? And I know that I think they're bringing in a thing now, or it has been suggested they bring in a thing now that once Tulsa are involved with the family and they give the child back and there's no cause for concern, there have to be revisits maybe every couple of months or whatever, just to see what the crack is, everything okay. But I can guarantee you this, Tulsa always gets it in the neck, and that's for others to decide. But I bet you this comes down to a lack of resources. You speak to anybody in Tulsa and each individual social worker or caseworker are snowed under with cases. And it's the tragedy of the system that they've got a massive workload. And I bet you that turns out to be a factor here.
You just hope that both this and the Kyron case are outliers, that there isn't going to be a shed load more of these types of cases. I honestly don't know how anybody goes to sleep at night having known, that their child is secretly buried in a field somewhere. It's very hard to get the head around. But look, I'm glad that the young child has been named today and that his photograph's been put out there and he's remembered as a human being, because
yes.
up until now, nobody knew who he was.
Well, I did have discussions with Senior Gardai about this, and I wrote actually on the Saturday that the guards wanted to name this boy, but they had to do it when it was operationally viable or operationally reasonable to do this. I was expecting it earlier, but I think the fact that the mother went back to the site on the Saturday and said, no, he's buried there, I'm convinced he's buried there, that gave them pause. So I think the plan would have been, if the site yielded nothing, they probably would have released a picture of young Daniel and his photo and his name. So now they found him and they can. But look, I do know that they were very keen to name him, but really the operational phase of this investigation has to take precedence over everything. So a lot of people were clamouring for the boy to be named, but I understand why the guards didn't.
No, it makes sense that they waited till this moment. But look, at least he can be remembered now, and hopefully the investigation, progresses and they're able to get some answers. It's a grim scene here. I mean, you can't. There's no real. You can't really see in. You're kind of looking over a fence and you can see some of the digging machinery, but it's right by a main road, so people, there's the odd dog walker here or there, but otherwise you wouldn't really, you'd think it was a building site really. But just around the back of it, where there is a gate, I note that there have been some flowers laid for Daniel, and I see that there is a message saying R.I.P. Daniel. So certainly it's hit the community, and it shows that people have been affected by it. It's just a grim scene. Look, we'll keep people updated. Thanks very much for listening to us. We'll be back to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.